Warfare, often synonymous with long, drawn-out battles that claim countless lives and drain resources, occasionally takes a different form, fast, furious, and devastatingly brief. In some cases, wars are fought and decided in a matter of days, hours, or even minutes, leaving behind a bewildering legacy. These conflicts, often overshadowed by larger and more prolonged wars, reveal the stark reality that power dynamics can shift in an instant, dramatically altering the course of history. From the rapid conquests of empires to sudden uprisings that catch opponents off guard, the shortest wars challenge our understanding of military strategy and the very nature of conflict. This exploration delves into some of the most notable examples of these brief yet impactful wars, examining their causes, consequences, and the lessons they impart about the unpredictability of human strife. Anglo-Zanzibar War, a 38-minute storm. On the morning of August 27, 1896, the tranquil air over Zanzibar was suddenly shattered by the deafening roar of British naval guns. The shortest war in recorded history was about to unfold, lasting a mere 38 minutes. The background to this explosive encounter was rooted in geopolitical intrigue and the complex power dynamics between the British Empire and the small but strategically important island of Zanzibar. Hamad bin Thuwaini, the Sultan of Zanzibar, had ruled the island as a British ally, ensuring the imperial interests of the British Empire in the region. However, when he suddenly died on August 25, 1896, his cousin Khalid bin Bargash seized the opportunity and declared himself the new Sultan. Bargash's rule was short-lived. The British, wary of his anti-colonial leanings and defiance, had already chosen a different candidate, Hamad bin Mohammed, a more compliant figure who would guarantee British dominance. The ultimatum was swift. Khalid was given a deadline. He must abdicate by 9 a.m. on August 27th or face military action. As the deadline passed with no movement from the palace, British warships anchored in the harbour unleashed their fury. The HMS St. George and HMS Philomel bombarded the palace, which crumbled in minutes. Sultan Khalid's forces, consisting mostly of poorly armed civilians and palace guards, were no match for British military might. Within 38 minutes, Khalid fled, seeking asylum in the German consulate. In this blink of a conflict, 500 Zanzibaris were killed or wounded, while only one British sailor was injured. The war's aftermath reinforced British control over Zanzibar, with Hamad bin Mohammed installed as a puppet ruler. Despite its brevity, the Anglo-Zanzibar War symbolized the harsh realities of colonial rule and the crushing efficiency of imperial military power. Wagner Group rebellion, a one-day mutiny in Russia. In a day that shook Russia's power structure to its core, the Wagner Group, a notorious paramilitary organization, rebelled against the very regime that had fostered its rise. On June 23, 2023, tensions between the Wagner Group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and the Russian military establishment exploded into open conflict. This extraordinary mutiny lasted just one day, but its implications reverberated throughout the political landscape of Russia. The Wagner Group had been a key player in Russia's foreign military engagements, often doing the Kremlin's bidding in places like Syria and Ukraine. However, growing frustrations over the handling of the war in Ukraine, coupled with Prigozhin's personal vendetta against Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, led to an armed uprising. Wagner forces seized control of the southern military district headquarters in Rostov-on-Don and launched an armored column toward Moscow. What followed was a surreal day of chaos and uncertainty. Russian President Vladimir Putin labeled the rebellion as treason, but within hours, a deal was brokered by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Prigozhin agreed to halt the advance and his forces withdrew. The deal allowed Prigozhin to escape prosecution and Wagner's men returned to their bases, ending one of the most bizarre and short-lived insurrections in modern history. Football war, soccer sparks, 4 days of bloodshed. The 100 Hours War, also known as the Football War, was a brief but intense conflict that took place between El Salvador and Honduras in July 1969. Despite its short duration of only 4 days, or roughly 100 hours, this war had long-lasting effects on Central American politics and the lives of those who experienced it. What makes this war particularly intriguing is that while it was named after a series of soccer matches, its origins were deeply rooted in broader socio-economic and political tensions. At the heart of the conflict were long-standing disputes between El Salvador and Honduras over land reform and immigration. In the years leading up to the war, large numbers of Salvadorans had migrated to Honduras due to the overpopulation and lack of arable land in El Salvador. This influx of Salvadorans into Honduras caused resentment among Honduran landowners and local populations, particularly as Salvadorans began to settle on agricultural land, often without legal rights. This economic tension simmered for years, with Salvadorans being scapegoated for economic troubles and increasing poverty in Honduras. By 1969, tensions between the two countries had reached a breaking point, exacerbated by a series of soccer matches during the World Cup qualifiers. The matches between the two national teams were fiercely contested, not only on the field, but also in the stands and the streets. The first match, played in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, on June 8, 1969, saw violence break out between fans. El Salvador won the second match in San Salvador on June 15th, which was also marred by violent confrontations between supporters. The final match, held in Mexico City on June 27th, was seen as the last straw. Following El Salvador's victory, the Salvadoran government severed diplomatic ties with Honduras on July 14th, citing the Honduran government's failure to protect Salvadoran immigrants from persecution. Within hours, Salvadoran troops crossed the border, launching aerial and ground assaults against Honduran targets. The war itself was intense, but short-lived. Salvadoran forces made rapid advances into Honduran territory, capturing several key towns. However, Honduran forces, with the assistance of hastily mobilized local militias, mounted a stubborn defense. The Organization of American States quickly intervened, calling for a ceasefire on July 18th, just 4 days after the war had begun. The human cost of the war was significant. Approximately 3,000 people were killed, and both countries suffered extensive damage to their infrastructure. Thousands of Salvadoran refugees fled Honduras in the aftermath, further straining relations between the two nations. Though the war officially lasted only 100 hours, its aftermath left deep scars on both sides, with the displacement of Salvadorans and lingering hostilities between the two governments. In the end, a peace agreement was brokered by the OAS, but the underlying issues, land reform, immigration, and poverty, remained unresolved for years. The 100 Hours War serves as a reminder of how ethnic and economic tensions, when left unchecked, can quickly spiral into violence, even over something as seemingly trivial as soccer. 6-Day War, 6 days that redefined the Middle East. In June 1967, the Middle East was forever changed by a conflict that would last only 6 days, but leave an enduring legacy. The 6-Day War, fought between Israel and its neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, was a pivotal moment in the region's history, redrawing the map and setting the stage for decades of tension and conflict. The lead up to the war was marked by escalating tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbors. In the months preceding the war, a series of skirmishes along Israel's borders, coupled with Egypt's growing alliance with Syria and Jordan, created a volatile situation. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser played a central role in heightening these tensions. In May 1967, Nasser ordered the withdrawal of United Nations peacekeeping forces from the Sinai Peninsula and imposed a blockade on the Straits of Tiran, cutting off Israel's access to the Red Sea. For Israel, this was tantamount to a declaration of war. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike, targeting the Egyptian Air Force in a surprise attack that would become the defining feature of the war's first day. The Israeli Air Force destroyed the majority of Egypt's aircraft while they were still on the ground, giving Israel complete air superiority. Within hours, the balance of power had shifted dramatically in Israel's favor. With Egypt's air defenses crippled, Israeli ground forces moved quickly, advancing into the Sinai Peninsula. Simultaneously, Israel opened fronts against Jordan in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as well as Syria in the Golan Heights. The war was characterized by swift and decisive Israeli victories on all fronts. By June 7th, Israeli forces had captured East Jerusalem and the West Bank from Jordan. The fall of Jerusalem in particular was a monumental moment for Israel, as it regained control of the city, including the Western Wall, a site of immense religious significance for Jews worldwide. 2 days later, on June 9th, Israel launched a final assault on the Golan Heights, and by June 10th, the war was over. In just 6 days, Israel had seized control of the Sinai Peninsula. the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The aftermath of the war had profound consequences for the Middle East. Israel's territorial gains more than tripled its land area and gave it strategic depth against future attacks. However, these territorial acquisitions also set the stage for ongoing disputes that persist to this day. The West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem became focal points of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, while Israel's control of the Golan Heights remains a contentious issue in its relations with Syria. Internationally, the war also shifted the Cold War dynamics in the Middle East, with the Soviet Union increasing its support for the Arab states, while the United States solidified its alliance with Israel. The Six-Day War not only reshaped the political landscape of the Middle East, but also deepened the ideological divides between Israel and its Arab neighbors, fueling conflicts that would erupt in the years to come, including the Yom Kippur War of 1973. The Six-Day War is remembered for its remarkable brevity and Israel's overwhelming military success, but the conflict's long-term consequences continue to shape the Middle East, particularly in the ongoing struggles over Palestinian statehood and regional security. War of the Stray Dog, when a dog triggered a border conflict. On October 19, 1925, a seemingly trivial event along the tense border between Greece and Bulgaria sparked a military conflict that lasted 11 days. Known as the War of the Stray Dog, this peculiar clash highlighted the fragility of peace in the Balkans in the aftermath of World War I and the continuing volatility in the region. The immediate trigger for the conflict was an incident involving a Greek soldier who crossed the border while chasing after his runaway dog. Bulgarian border guards, suspecting the Greek soldier of encroaching on their territory, opened fire, killing him. This small but deadly exchange set off a rapid escalation. Greece, furious over the death of their soldier, launched a military response, ordering troops to invade Bulgarian territory near the town of Petrik. Although Greece's incursion was limited in scope, it reflected the deep mistrust and unresolved territorial disputes that had plagued the region for decades. The two countries had fought on opposing sides during the Second Balkan War in 1913, and territorial tensions had persisted despite the end of major hostilities. As Greek forces advanced into Bulgaria, the situation threatened to spiral out of control. Civilians were evacuated from the border areas, and sporadic clashes continued for days. However, neither country could afford a prolonged war, particularly in the economically devastated post-World War I environment. The international community quickly took notice of the growing conflict. The League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, was eager to prevent another large-scale war in Europe. In response, they stepped in to mediate. After a series of negotiations, the League demanded an immediate ceasefire and instructed Greece to withdraw its troops from Bulgarian territory. Furthermore, Greece was ordered to pay reparations to Bulgaria, totaling £45,000 as compensation for the damages caused during the brief conflict. The War of the Stray Dog lasted just over 11 days, but it demonstrated the volatile and often fragile nature of international borders in the Balkans. The incident also highlighted the role that international organizations like the League of Nations could play in resolving conflicts, although the League's ability to enforce its rulings was often questioned. The war may have been brief and sparked by an unusual event, but it is remembered as a symbol of how quickly tensions can flare up in regions where historical grievances run deep. While it did not result in significant territorial changes or heavy casualties, it was a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the post-war Balkans and the potential for small incidents to escalate into larger conflicts. Russo-Georgian War, a 12-day struggle for control. In August 2008, a brief but intense war erupted between Russia and Georgia, leaving behind long-lasting geopolitical ramifications. Though the war itself lasted just 12 days, the conflict reshaped the post-Soviet landscape and highlighted the deep-seated tensions between Russia and its neighboring states, especially those looking to the West for political and economic alliances. Known as the Russo-Georgian War, this conflict was triggered by disputes over the breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, two areas that had long sought independence from Georgia with the backing of Russia. The roots of the war can be traced to the disintegration of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Both South Ossetia and Abkhazia declared their intent to break away from Georgia. leading to violent confrontations between separatists and Georgian forces. Although ceasefires were brokered, the conflicts remained unresolved, with Russian peacekeepers stationed in both regions. Georgia, under the leadership of President Mikhail Saakashvili, pursued closer ties with NATO and the European Union, much to the displeasure of Moscow. The push toward Western alignment intensified tensions, as Russia viewed Georgia's potential NATO membership as a direct threat to its sphere of influence in the region. On August 7, 2008, these simmering tensions boiled over. Saakashvili, believing that a military operation could swiftly bring South Ossetia back under Georgian control, launched an offensive to retake the region's capital, Tskhinvali. The Georgian military attack, however, faced immediate resistance from South Ossetian forces, and Russia quickly entered the fray. Just a day later, Russian troops poured into South Ossetia under the pretext of defending Russian citizens living in the region, many of whom had been granted Russian passports in the years prior. Russia's response was overwhelming. In addition to sending ground forces, the Russian military launched airstrikes deep into Georgian territory, targeting military bases, infrastructure, and even civilian areas. Within days, Russian troops had crossed into Georgia proper, advancing towards strategic locations including the city of Gori, a key hub along Georgia's main east-west highway. Meanwhile, a second front was opened in Abkhazia, where Russian and Abkhaz forces pushed Georgian troops out of the region. The international community reacted with alarm, particularly in the west, where Russia's actions were seen as an aggressive attempt to reassert dominance over its former Soviet republics. Diplomatic efforts to halt the fighting were led by French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who was then holding the rotating presidency of the European Union. After several days of intense negotiations, a ceasefire agreement was reached on August 12th, bringing an end to the hostilities. Despite the short duration of the war, the consequences were far-reaching. Both South Ossetia and Abkhazia declared independence from Georgia, and Russia recognized them as independent states, a move that was condemned by the international community. The war left thousands of civilians displaced, with reports of ethnic cleansing by both sides further complicating the humanitarian situation. Over 1,400 people were killed, and much of Georgia's infrastructure was left in ruins. The Russo-Georgian War also marked a turning point in Russia's foreign policy. It signaled Moscow's willingness to use military force to protect its interests in its near abroad, particularly in regions where pro-Western governments sought closer ties with NATO. For Georgia, the war was a national trauma, and it further deepened the country's resolve to integrate with the West. However, the conflict also exposed Georgia's vulnerability in the face of Russia's overwhelming military power. In the years since the war, tensions between Russia and Georgia have remained high. While direct military conflict has not resumed, the situation in South Ossetia and Abkhazia remains unresolved. Russian troops continue to occupy both regions, and Georgia has been left with little recourse to reclaim its lost territories. The international community, particularly the European Union and the United States, continues to support Georgia's sovereignty, but diplomatic efforts to reverse Russia's recognition of the breakaway regions have so far been unsuccessful. The Russo-Georgian War was a brief but consequential conflict that underscored the fragile nature of peace in the post-Soviet space. It also demonstrated the lengths to which Russia would go to prevent its neighbors from aligning with the West, setting the stage for future conflicts in Ukraine and other parts of the former Soviet Union. Indo-Pakistani War, 13 days that created Bangladesh. In December 1971, the Indian subcontinent was engulfed in one of the briefest yet most significant wars of the 20th century. This war, fought between India and Pakistan over the independence of East Pakistan, lasted just 13 days, but permanently changed the geopolitical map of South Asia. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 was a decisive conflict that led to the creation of Bangladesh, ending years of repression and political turmoil in East Pakistan. The roots of the war can be traced to the cultural and linguistic differences between East and West Pakistan. Despite being geographically separated by 1,600 kilometers, Pakistan's leadership, based in the West, dominated national politics, while East Pakistan, though more populous, was marginalized. Tensions reached a boiling point after the 1970 general elections, in which the Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, won a landslide victory in East Pakistan. The central government in West Pakistan refused to recognize the results, fearing the growing autonomy movement in the east. What followed was brutal. The Pakistani military launched Operation Searchlight in March 1971 to suppress the independence movement in East Pakistan, resulting in widespread atrocities. Estimates suggest that up to 300,000 people were killed in the ensuing crackdown, while millions fled to India, creating a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale. India, led by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, watched the crisis unfold with growing alarm. By December 1971, the situation had escalated into full-scale war after Pakistan launched preemptive airstrikes on Indian air bases on December 3, 1971, hoping to catch India off guard. India responded with overwhelming force, launching a multi-front assault on both the western and eastern sectors. The Indian military, under the command of General Sam Manekshaw, swiftly advanced on Dhaka, the capital of East Pakistan. By December 16th, Pakistani forces were encircled and forced to surrender, marking the end of the war. The victory was swift and decisive. An astounding 93,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered, the largest such capitulation since World War II. The war resulted in the independence of Bangladesh, with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman returning to lead the new nation. For India, the war was a resounding success, not only strategically, but also in terms of humanitarian intervention. The conflict, although brief, ended years of suffering for the Bengali people and established India as a dominant power in South Asia. Serbo-Bulgarian War, 14 days of Balkan power struggles. In November 1885, a war broke out between two of the Balkans' emerging powers, Serbia and Bulgaria, that would last only 14 days, but its outcome reshaped the region's balance of power. Known as the Serbo-Bulgarian War, this conflict was rooted in territorial disputes and national ambitions that were common in the volatile Balkans during the late 19th century. The war was triggered by the unification of Bulgaria with eastern Rumelia, a semi-autonomous region that had been under Ottoman control. Serbia, alarmed by Bulgaria's growing power and territorial expansion, saw an opportunity to weaken its neighbor by declaring war. Serbian King Milan sought to capitalize on Bulgaria's apparent vulnerability, believing that the newly unified state would struggle to mobilize an effective defense. However, the Bulgarian forces, under the leadership of young officers who had fought in earlier uprisings against Ottoman rule, surprised everyone with their military skill and determination. The key battle of the war took place at Slivnica, where the Bulgarian army, though outnumbered, managed to decisively defeat the Serbian forces. The Serbs were forced into a hasty retreat, and within days, the Bulgarians were advancing into Serbian territory. Despite its early miscalculations, Serbia was saved from total defeat by the intervention of Austria-Hungary, which feared that a Bulgarian victory could destabilize the region. Under pressure from the great powers, an armistice was signed on November 28, 1885, bringing the short but intense war to an end. The Serbo-Bulgarian War cemented Bulgaria's status as a rising power in the Balkans and led to its formal recognition as an independent state by the international community. Serbia, on the other hand, suffered a humiliating defeat, though the political fallout was mitigated by Austria-Hungary's intervention. In the years that followed, the two nations would continue to vie for dominance in the region, setting the stage for further Balkan conflicts. Norman Conquest, 17 days that changed England forever. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 was a transformative moment in European history, and it unfolded in just 17 days. William the Conqueror's invasion and subsequent victory at the Battle of Hastings would forever alter the course of English history, setting the stage for centuries of Norman influence over the British Isles. The story begins with the death of the childless King Edward the Confessor of England in January 1066. With no direct heir, the English throne became the prize of a deadly contest between several powerful claimants. Among them were Harold Godwinson, the most powerful noble in England, and William, Duke of Normandy, who claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. When Harold was crowned king, William wasted no time preparing for an invasion. On September 28, 1066, William's forces landed on the southern coast of England, near Pevensey. Within days, the two armies met at Hastings, where one of the most famous battles in history took place. The Battle of Hastings, fought on October 14th, was a brutal clash that lasted for much of the day. Harold's forces, though formidable, were ultimately outmatched by the Normans' tactical superiority and use of cavalry. Harold himself was killed in the battle, struck down by an arrow, and his death marked the collapse of English resistance. After 17 days of military maneuvering and one decisive battle, William was crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066. The Norman conquest profoundly altered England's political, cultural, and linguistic landscape. Norman rule introduced feudalism, reshaped the English aristocracy, and laid the foundations for the centralized English state that would emerge in the centuries to come. Second Balkan War, a 32-day struggle. The Second Balkan War, fought from June 29th to August 10th, 1913, serves as a pivotal episode in the tumultuous history of the Balkan Peninsula. The conflict arose from the aftermath of the First Balkan War, where the Balkan League, comprised of Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria, successfully ousted the Ottoman Empire from most of its European territories. However, tensions quickly escalated among the victors, primarily between Bulgaria and its former allies. At the heart of the conflict was Bulgaria's dissatisfaction with the territorial gains achieved during the First Balkan War. While Bulgaria had expected to acquire significant portions of Macedonia, the post-war settlement left much of the territory to Serbia and Greece. The Bulgarian leadership, led by Tsar Ferdinand I and Prime Minister Vasil Radoslavov, sought to rectify this perceived injustice. Feeling isolated and embittered, Bulgaria felt compelled to act decisively. The war began on June 29, 1913, when Bulgaria launched a surprise attack against Serbia and Greece. Initially, the Bulgarian army aimed to seize control of the disputed regions in Macedonia, but the strategy proved overly ambitious. Bulgaria's military, though numerically strong with about 300,000 troops, faced several disadvantages. The Serbians and Greeks had established stronger positions and better logistics, and both nations were able to mobilize swiftly against Bulgaria's advances. Within days of the conflict's onset, Bulgaria encountered fierce resistance. Serbian forces launched a counter-offensive, capturing the strategic city of Kumanovo, while Greek troops advanced into southern Macedonia. The Bulgarian command, underestimating the resolve and capability of its adversaries, struggled to coordinate its forces effectively. Bulgarian troops were also hampered by logistical challenges and a lack of unified command, which diminished their fighting efficiency. As the war progressed, Bulgaria found itself overwhelmed on multiple fronts. Serbia's army, buoyed by its recent successes, advanced steadily towards Sofia, Bulgaria's capital, while Greece encroached on Bulgarian-held territories in the south. The Bulgarian army, beset by heavy losses, began to retreat. By the end of July, Bulgaria's situation had become increasingly dire. The final phase of the conflict culminated in the Battle of Bregalnica, fought between July 30th and August 2nd, 1913. Despite valiant efforts, Bulgarian forces were decisively defeated by a combined Serbian and Greek army. The rapid succession of defeats compelled Bulgaria to seek an armistice. The war formally ended on August 10, 1913, after a mere 32 days of intense fighting. The aftermath of the Second Balkan War left Bulgaria in a precarious position. The Treaty of Bucharest, signed on August 10th, resulted in significant territorial losses for Bulgaria, ceding much of Macedonia to Serbia and Greece, and parts of Dobruja to Romania. The implications of the war reverberated throughout the Balkans, exacerbating nationalistic sentiments and laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The war's brevity and intensity highlight the complexities of Balkan politics in the early 20th century, where alliances shifted rapidly and national aspirations often clashed. The Second Balkan War serves as a stark illustration of the consequences of unchecked ambition and the fragility of diplomatic relations. Bulgaria, once a prominent player in the region, found itself diminished and isolated, setting the stage for its later involvement in World War I and further regional turmoil. The swift but lasting impact of brief wars, While wars are often synonymous with prolonged suffering and drawn-out campaigns, these 10 short wars show that even the briefest conflicts can leave an indelible mark on history. Whether lasting minutes or mere days, these wars reshaped nations, redrew borders, and altered the balance of power. They remind us that the speed of warfare is no guarantee of its consequences. In fact, many of these brief conflicts, like the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, the Norman Conquest, and the Six-Day War, had consequences that would reverberate for decades, even centuries, after the last shots were fired. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious